Another thing that could influence how children develop is parenting styles. And this is the nurture part of the nature-nurture debate that we're always talking about, where nature would be things like what genes did they inherit from their parents. And here we're talking about the environment that the child is growing up in. Here we're wondering, how does parenting style influence a child's upbringing? And when we think about it, there are tons of different parenting styles out there, thousands of them. There are many, many different ways to raise your children. But one aspect of parenting that has received a lot of attention is that of control. And by that we mean the amount of control that a parent wants to have over their child, or how much a parent feels that they need and should be able to control the life of his or her offspring. So things like whether or not a parent is hard on a child or soft on a child. That's what we mean when we're talking about control. And there's actually been quite a bit of research that's been done on this, and researchers have isolated 3 main parenting styles. The first is called authoritarian. The next one is authoritative. And the last is permissive. Authoritarian parents impose lots of rules, and they expect obedience from their child at all time. But what is the result of growing up in a household like this, a household that has a ton of rules and demands obedience at all times? Well, it turns out that it doesn't actually have great results. We know that children who are raised by authoritarian parents have lower social skills than other children who have been raised in different households. We also know that their self-esteem is much lower. And from talking about really strict parents, I now want to talk about not so strict parents. So let's move over to the permissive parenting style. And in this parenting style, rather than having rules, the parent typically submits to what the child wants. These households tend to have very few punishments, and for the punishments that they do have, they're rarely carried out, or there's no follow-through. And research has also shown that there are some pretty consistent results of what happened when kids are raised with this parenting style. And despite what we would like to believe, it's actually not terribly positive. For one, we know that kids raised in permissive households tend to have a lot of aggression issues. They also tend to be a lot more immature than their peers. Well, so far we haven't really had good news. So far we've talked about how strict parents have children with low self-esteem and low social skills, and permissive parenting results in children who are immature and who are aggressive. After looking at these two things, you might wonder, how do we raise mature and sociable kids? And the answer turns out to be authoritative parenting. And I've written it in between these two things because it actually is in between these two things. And I like to think about it in a sort of a Goldilocks way, where authoritarian is too hard and permissive is too soft, and authoritative is just right. And so authoritative parenting seems to combine the best things from both authoritarian parenting and permissive parenting. Authoritative parents are demanding of their children, just as authoritarian parents are. However, they're also responsive to the needs of their child, like permissive parents. So they are concerned for their children, but they're warm to them as well. Like authoritarian parents, authoritative parents also tend to have a lot of rules, and they also tend to enforce them. However, the thing that separates authoritarian from authoritative parenting in terms of rules, the difference is that authoritative parents explain the rules to their children, so the children know exactly why these rules are in place. And in addition to this, as the child grows up, authoritative parents will typically listen to their kids when they question the rules. And so there's a lot of communication between parent and child about what is best for the child. So what are the results of authoritative parenting? Well, for one thing, children of authoritative parents tend to have high self-esteem. They also have an increased self-reliance, meaning that they'll depend on themselves for things that they need. And as compared to other children with different styles of parenting, they also tend to have really high social skills. From the research that's been done on control, it seems pretty clear that authoritative parenting has the best outcomes. However, like most theories, there are some problems with this theory. The first thing has to do with how all of this research has been conducted. And our first question is, who do they collect data from? What is the population of the study? Well, like most research, it tends to be white middle-class families. And so we have to ask, is it fair of us to say that this research on parenting styles applies to all families? Could there be cultural variation? I think that it's possible. Another thing we should note is that all of this research is correlational in nature. And I'm sure this has already been drilled into your head, but correlation does not imply causation. We cannot say that these parenting styles are causing these traits in children. In order to do that, we would need to have experimental research, meaning that we would need to hold one variable constant while manipulating other variables in attempts to isolate what is actually driving the behavior. Unfortunately, that would not really be ethical. We can't randomly split up parents and say, hey, you guys need to be really hard and strict with your kids, and you guys really need to be soft and really let the child guide what's going on. That's really not something you're going to get a good response to. But you might be thinking, even so, it seems pretty clear that these parenting styles are causing these outcomes. However, there are definitely other things that it could be. For example, the traits of the child could be influencing the parent, instead of the other way around. And by that I mean that some kids might require more warmth. Maybe kids who are socially mature and they're agreeable, they gain their parents' trust and therefore gain their parents' warmth. But other kids, maybe kids that are less socially aware, maybe kids who are less mature, less agreeable, they lose their parents' trust, which leads their parents to become more controlling. So let me put a question mark right here. And of course, like all correlational research, there could be some third factor that we're actually not seeing that could actually be driving this entire effect. And who knows, maybe it's actually something that's genetic, that socially mature, warm parents tend to have warm, socially mature children, and it has nothing to do with environment whatsoever.